past the line?
I don't see any. It just says babies. I'm online. Anyone there? Steve, that's Steve.
This is the worst about the flags.
I was going to say, it smells like fun with flags.
One of these days we'll get this right, but theoretically we are streaming right now. Let's see. Yeah. So.
Hey, there we
Oh,
are.
there we are. It's working.
Yay.
I see us.
Slight delay.
Oh, there's a bit of delay.
All right.
All right. Now that it's confirmed to work.
I see. Okay.
Cool. Thanks everyone for coming. For those who don't know me, my name's Katie. I'm a senior software engineer at 30 Madison. Welcome back to the base roundtables. We were doing them up to the pandemic, and we're now resurrecting them. These are some of my favorite events, mostly because we get people together. We talk about not right, wrong, or factual things, but kind of teasing out nuances and context. So I'm very excited. Tonight's conversation is about, working at different sizes of companies. We have a wonderful panel here. I'm going to let them go ahead and introduce themselves and give a little bit of background.
Mikhail Kozorovitskiy. I am leading architect at SUSE for the Kubernetes and Containers group, and as well as the founder of Daedalus, which is a new startup.
Jenni Nelson, software engineer at Integrate. I guess I'll talk about the size of companies, since we're going to get into that. But Integrate's a 300-person company, but I spent most of my career at a very small startup. So I'll talk about it.
Cool. Dr. Lindsay Sutton. I am a serial entrepreneur here in Birmingham and currently lead experiential strategy for Shift.
How big is Ship now?
A lot. It's very big. It's very big.
So SUSE, I guess, is about 2,000 people as well. So
It's very big. Thousands.
So let's start off. What do we mean when we talk about small, medium, large companies? Are we talking, is there a ballpark number you guys think of when you think of small, medium, or large? And do you also think of, since we're talking about the tech realm mostly, does that mean number of employees, number of engineers, or what does your team size look like?
Good question.
That is a good question.
who wants to go?
Well,
I feel like there's a lot of factors, right? I think size of team is really important, but I think one of the bigger things for me is the disciplines on the team. Like, how much of it do I have to outsource? How much of it is internal? I think because we can augment our teams so easily, especially with developers and engineers. But when we think about product strategy, when we think about brand strategy, when we think about UX, UI, QA, there's so many other disciplines now that go into technology besides just development, that I try to determine the size of a team based on where all of the disciplines live. And yes, we know very lean startups, usually a handful of people who are usually looking for consultants and other people to augment their experience and expertise. But I'd say small is probably 10 to 25, 30 people. Mid-size is getting into the 100. Large, probably anything over 200.
So I've heard the term scale-up referred to companies that are over like 100 people. And I've seen startups reference this as a milestone very improperly. And to where they focus on, okay, well, if we get 100 people, we're in scale-up mode.
Yeah.
Versus, if we do enough work to get enough clients to prove our point or prove our technology. So I think that characterization could be really misleading. I think, and then for small companies, a startup versus a small business, right? Because depending on the growth trajectory, your company may not be growing past that size, and I think that creates a very different culture than like a rapid growing startup versus a small business that provides a service or some kind of tool.
I agree. I think it has to do with the levels and the layers too, right? Like, how far are you removed from the furthest person? Is it 6 levels away? Is it, when in the startup mode, I had a horizontal partnership, and there were no levels. We were all equal, and we all pulled our weight, and it was 5 people. right? That looks very different from the teams now when one of the teams sitting on operations for me has 500. There's no way I would know all of them personally.
So, okay, so let's talk about layers. So how many layers does it, so a startup is between how many layers? Is that in your head? Like, is it 3 layers? Is it 2 layers? How many layers?
It's probably 2 or 3. I think the founder is also working in the business, not just on the business. They have a skill set that they're bringing to the table, hence why the product or service exists in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that was my experience. We had 8 people, and there was not a lot of hierarchy there. There just really can't be. So 1 to 2 layers.
Yeah,
for sure.
like it's definitely shrunk.
For the record, I work in like a 6 or 7 layer system right now. So it's large.
And would you say you're closer to the top? Or?
No. Probably wouldn't be starting my own company if I was on the other side of that.
So how do you know what works for you when you're happy in a company and in an environment that's good for you? How do you determine what works for you, and how do you know? And what does work for you?
So I'm going to speak to that because this is something I've had to figure out recently. And it's really about context, and it's about time in your life too. I think it's important to remember that doesn't stay static. That's an ever-changing thing. For me, when I was working for the small startup, I was coming out of coding school. I was changing. It was my second career, and I was trying to figure out what I was interested in terms of the stack, and in terms of, do I want to stay in engineering? Do I want to explore product and kinds of things? And so that was a great place for me because I got an opportunity to explore and experiment. I decided to leave that world because I really wanted to focus. I'd honed in on what I wanted to do, and I wanted to sharpen that craft. So how do you know? I think taking that intentional time to think about what are my priorities now, what does my life look like right now, and thinking about your life holistically, not just your job, to figure out what's the right context for you.
And I think to my point earlier, the size really doesn't, it can be a large company, but culturally they can be very different. Right? If you follow Reed Hastings and Netflix, then they have a very open and direct philosophy that is most commonly found in startups, because it's hard to maintain that kind of honesty without ruffling a lot of feathers permanently. So I think they're one of the few that is able to take that culture and grow it to a large size, whereas I think most companies, though, their culture at startup stage ends up snowballing, positively or negatively, and it enlarges the problems that they had as a startup, but if the culture is positive and strong, then it's the death spiral or virtuous cycle.
I genuinely think the best way to answer this question is how do you figure out who you are, right? Are you an order taker or are you an order maker? Are you someone who wants to lead people versus be led? How much autonomy do you want? How much exposure to the business do you want? Are you looking to sharpen your sword, or are you looking to expand your skills, right? So if I know there's a large organization, I'm probably going to have to solidify what I want to do and go down that path. If I go into a startup, there's going to be more opportunity for me to be closer to all aspects of the business. One of the first places I started in the software engineering group, there was really 2 tracks. It was like, look, we need, and how we delineated how you moved up was whether or not you wanted to manage people, whether or not you were even capable of it, right? Because now you have an engineer who's moving into a leadership role, or a developer who needs to move into a leadership role, and this is not a judgment. Some of them were flat out like, no, I don't want that. I want to do my best work. I want to stay in my lane. This is what I'm good at. Leading people is not. But it took him saying to me, that is not for me. He needed to know what he wanted, right? So it really is you saying, hey, this is where I want to grow. This is what I want to know. And this is where I see myself in the future. So how do I set up and be intentional about the context and the environments I put myself in order to facilitate that growth, right? So I'm a very big person that's always going to be an advocate for know thyself. That's the only way that you're going to be able to see, to your point, is this culture, as it snowballs, is this still a fit for me? Am I going to lead or am I being led?
And then looking at opportunities for growth and changing lanes. I don't have a ton of experience at large companies. Where I am now, this is week 3 for me, but I'm already seeing it'd be a lot harder to kind of hop off engineering or go down a different path. I have to be a lot more intentional about kind of networking within the company to do that. Whereas I think about my job right after college was at Whole Foods in the brasserie, cooking. That doesn't exist anymore. But I'm bringing this up because I was placed behind the counter at the prepared foods, like scooping chicken salad. And I did not want to be there, so I just because I was adjacent to other things, I could just kind of inch my way over there, and you can do that at a small company much more easily. You can shadow and get to know other roles.
So how do you start figuring out when things aren't working for you? And I'm gonna push, do you personally identify things that you know don't work for you when you get to
Yes.
differing sizes of companies?
I think yes, and I don't think it matters the size of the company, at least
No.
in my experience. But it didn't happen until I started doing what Lindsay, what you were saying is, really intentionally thinking about what's going on around me, and this happened to me with a small company and a large company, where I saw the direction that it was headed and where I could be, in that direction. And I surmised the direction would be to running out of money, and where I would be would not be positive. So I ended up leaving, and 3 weeks later they had a firing event, let go half the team. So I think it's a feeling. For me, it's always been a feeling. There are logical things, but I can't speak to them. I can only speak that it's a feeling you get, and then you're like, oh, this isn't working for me anymore.
I can pinpoint moments where I was like, I'm done, right? You just know that it's like tipping, and then all of these factors align, and you're like, and I'm out. And the things I'm specifically pointing to are when I realized their culture was bullshit. It was just a plaque on the wall, right? You're like, here's all these things you say, but how it shows up and what's tolerated amongst teammates and in the cross-functional team component was just crap, right? It wasn't real. It was just a selling point. And that's that is a very inauthentic place for me that just doesn't jive with anything I want to do. The other one I would say is when I was raising my hand for more growth opportunities and getting my hand slapped. That's a major block for me. And if I am someone who's absolutely going to control my own destiny and say, then if you're not going to help me, I'm going to remove myself from the situation. But I gave you 90 days to correct it. And then I left. So I know that there are things, so when you know yourself, knowing yourself is knowing your boundaries and what you will tolerate and what you will not. You have non-negotiables. That shows up in your work. I'm a staunch advocate for the LGBTQ plus community. If I sense it in a culture, I'm not going to last long. If there's any discrimination, if there's any bias and prejudice, it doesn't work for me because I can't show up authentically if that discrimination exists in a culture.
Do you live here in Birmingham, work in Birmingham?
I sure do.
How do you feel about that now? What's going on in this town? This is the South. This is the Black Belt, the Christians. What do you feel?
I am surrounded by people and organizations and a network that supports me wholeheartedly. I have a mayor who supports me and stands up for me. I feel very confident. Do I experience discrimination when I'm out in public? Yes, especially if I'm with a partner. But that is on a personal thing. I have not ever seen that show up professionally for me. And thank the gods or universe or what you believe in. I have not shown, that has never been an issue for me professionally. It took a lot for me to come out, but I was received well.
So the main thing is your company support you? You don't really care about the society.
I absolutely care about the society. I'm an advocate there, right? Like, I care if I can marry my partner. I care if they have access to my insurance and my family and my finances. But this discussion currently is about how this shows up for us professionally.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, professionally, I won't work for a company if I think that our values don't align.
Lindsay, can I follow up on this?
Absolutely.
If you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Do you feel that it is easier to make a stand or to voice concerns about culture if you're based on the size of company you are in? Do you feel like if you are in a smaller company, you have more room to push back, move, and change minds? Or do you feel that larger companies can serve those needs better?
I think it's both, right? So someone who has started my own business, I created the culture I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
That's the intent behind starting your own businesses, right? You surround yourself with people who support you and who will allow you to show up authentically and who will actually call you on the carpet when you're not, right? When you're violating your own truth, because that happens too. Right? But I would say, I know going into an organization, just like they're evaluating us, I'm evaluating them. I'm not applying to a place where I know or have any suspicion. You can Google headlines. You can Google where they place their fundraising and their volunteer efforts and get a sense for where a company's values align.
I think you can't really, you can't highlight that enough, that the values have to be aligned whenever you're choosing where to work for.
Yeah.
And
That's big and small. That's medium size.
And there are some large companies that do it really well. Like, I work for SUSE. We're a German company. Our CEO, half our leadership team is female. Like, we do a very good job about highlighting that and trying to build a diverse workforce, as well as how we sponsor things in the community as well, to try to push that. So it definitely is very environment related and I don't think it's very size related.
Yeah, I was the first employee at the small startup, and so did get to be part of that, building our values and building our culture. But at the end of the day, and it probably depends on who your founders are and how much feedback they're open to, but you do get to influence it, but there's not that level of, want to use the word oversight that a larger company has, and they kind of are held to a higher standard because of that. So I've appreciated working for a larger organization because I feel more protected and just supported just across the board. But I also work for a great company.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we're hearing different ways of approaching that. I want to come back, Jennifer, to something that you've dropped in on a little bit, but I want to get the whole panel's opinions on this. How does experience level affect where you fit in at different size companies?
Confidence. I think the more experienced you are, the more you're able to handle different situations and tolerate or know the things that you're willing to tolerate and not. And I think early on, I didn't really know. So I just I spent my first company, I spent 10 years at, not industry, but so it was a startup, but that environment was crazy. I don't know if I could ever do that again. But it was just very direct and blunt. But once you kind of establish yourself, you also know your worth, and then you can choose better. Excuse me. I'm not dying.
Are you gonna make it?
Yeah.
Are you going to kill any of us?
Hopefully not.
So, are you saying that ability to be more selective, is that where you referred to when you say confidence or?
Confident, in understanding what you want, but also what you're willing to tolerate. Excuse me, I'm going to grab some water.
Yeah, I was about to say.
So that's one of the things that we're going to hear, right? Like, if I'm new, if I'm like a junior Lindsay, Dr. Sutton, like, I hear you, like, I'm, this organization has to reflect my values and all these things, but, like, I'm desperate for a job. Like, I've got to take a job. I agree. We all have to pay our bills, so we have to choose our sacrifice, right? But we get to a place where we kind of, like, we have to own our own misery. We have to take responsibility and say, okay, I know that I'm not happy here, but I always looked at it like, okay, then I'm going to learn everything I can. I'm going to take advantage of every program, of every extra education, of every certification they offer. I'm going to make sure there's no contingencies that I don't want to have to deal with, right, that I can't afford, or I don't want to stay here for another 18 months or whatever the negotiation is. But it's like, then move on. Learn what you need to learn and move on, and realize that, keep that in your mind. Okay, I went to one of the most prestigious universities, and I remember thinking, this is just a stepping stone. This is not the end. So I hear junior devs, I hear people coming into tech saying, like, I've got to take this job. Like, I don't have any other offers. Like, I got to pay my bills. Do it, right? I made smoothies for a while. I bartended with a damn near Ivy League degree. Like, you do what you need to do to survive. But trust me, you're going to get to a point, get experience under your belt, and then you are going to start writing your own ticket. And it's what you do at that point that's going to shape the rest of your career.
I go back and forth. I'm kind of 50-50 on should a junior dev join a startup or because I did that, and I definitely was at that place of I need a job. The hardest job is the first job, getting a foot in the door, and so when I look back, and I'm not that far removed from it, so I'm still kind of processing all of that, but I learned a ton, and I got to experience so much. I feel behind a little bit in my craft. I feel like I'm, coming into this role now, and I know a lot of things that a lot of engineers don't know, but I don't know a lot of things that engineers should know and do know. And so it's a trade-off there. I guess my only advice would be, make sure you got somebody that, even if it's a really small company, that can mentor you, that can teach you, that values that. I was lucky in the sense that our founder was technical, and he wanted to teach me everything. He was so excited about that, and that was huge for me. And he wanted to expose me to so many different areas of the business, and was constantly pulling me in and getting feedback and things like that. So it wasn't that environment, and it could have been where it was like, crank out as much as you can, stay up all night all the time, and work crazy hours. I didn't have that experience. So beware of the hustle porn. I didn't make that term up, but it's a good one to describe a lot of the startup life. And I'm glad, Mikhail, that you mentioned the difference between a startup and a small business, because those are totally different worlds, for sure. What was the question?
Experience level.
Triggers
level effect. Working.
I mean, I think when you go into it too, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're like, okay, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to figure it out as I go. I've got to figure out the networking thing. I would always encourage people to have an in-industry, like in your specialization mentor, and someone out of industry. Right? You need a balance of that objective view that can kind of look in and be like, hey, I mean, one of the questions you asked me today, like, but how are you doing? Right? Not like, how's the job, but no, literally, how's your mental health? Like, you need someone to kind of check you on that too, that's kind of outside of your world. Right? So I think mentors are a huge deal, but I would also encourage you to choose one outside of the industry that can guide you, especially women in industry. Find another mentor outside. One of mine is an MD that lives in California. One of them is a local female entrepreneur in the food industry. Right? That's nothing to do with technology, right? But it's like, these are people who care about how I progress in my professional and personal life, because you can't have one without the other. Yeah.
Following up on what Jennifer's saying, and I'd like to ask the panel individually, with what Katie's saying is, as a maybe beginning in tech and then now in tech as experience, if you could go back, what would be what size company would you think you would learn the most from, and necessarily, and just a little bit of order on that. redevelop, so you
Yeah.
could start over at more advanced now, and then pretend you could
Yeah.
visualize where we were gonna be at.
I know personally my path was great. I had a mid-sized company that I got exposure to all elements of the business, right? It was just large enough where there was, a handful of teams, and it was full service when it came to marketing technology, strategy, development. I mean, it had a very cool balance of clients. So that, I think, for me was so progressive to allow me to see the possibilities and see how all of these disciplines interact, right? How they need each other, where are the contingencies, where are the pain points and the barriers. As a strategist, as a planner, like a product strategist and a product manager doing that role, I got to see that bird's eye view and then got to be in the weeds with dev, looking at timelines and resources and velocity and doing these sprint plans, right? So I feel like that mid-size was a sweet spot for me, because then I went straight into a startup, loved it, and now I'm at a huge organization.
So was it the fact that it was a mid-sized company, you think, or the fact that it was an agency? Because I worked for...
I loved the discipline. It goes back to the disciplines. Where do they live? Do you have exposure to them?
So for me, I had a similar experience, but at a small company that was an agency. I think because it was an agency, that's where the flexibility comes from. Because at an agency, you're doing, not only 50 different projects, they may be 50 different technologies, 50 different types of...
Yeah.
Well, not 50, but, maybe 10 different types of things. But so do you think that, does it matter what size it is as long as it's an agency then? Because...
I don't. I love the okay. Look, when you have that many clients, maybe it's the clients too, right? Because all of the multitude of clients allow you to have a multitude of problems you're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. When you're on the client side, you're solving one thing. Okay, we need to make sure this stands up and we sell a thing, right? When you're okay, that's one thing I'm working on, but I'm also working on this new content creator and this new ag thing and this global automotive company and this local automotive company and insurance. I mean, these are completely complex and unique problems that I got to see a lot and do a lot very quickly.
All right, you guys really jumped the gun on my last question, which was about what
It's your fault.
I'm just kidding. Great.
about what are other factors outside of size that you really consider? And I think the word we heard a lot over and over was culture. So I'm going to take a second here to dig into that. What points of culture? When we say culture, what specific values and cultural elements?
I think this is a great topic for another roundtable too. I think we
can punt on it, but
no, let's tease it a little bit here. Oh,
So I think directness, right? Whether you give feedback directly and you receive feedback directly, and there's several different ways of doing that, right? Netflix just shouts it in the middle of the room. Other companies have a more private way of doing that. But I think either way, as long as it happens, right? So some cultures you have to it's done in more complicated ways for less direct cultures. And there's a book, Culture Map, by the same co-author that authored No Rules, Rules with Reed Hastings. Erin Meyer, I think her name is. And it talks about the different cultures and how their directness level and how they're direct, how direct they are relative to each other in a bunch of different categories. But I think some kind of way of being able to provide honest feedback, because without honest feedback, you're not learning, and without learning, you're not getting better. So a culture, even if it's good but doesn't learn, is liable to slip and spiral.
Totally agree. I'm huge on feedback should be two ways as well, right? It should not be flowing one way from the top down. We should be able, if we're in a communicative and collaborative environment, that would be my other thing. Is it collaborative or competitive? Even between teams, between divisions, are we actually supporting each other, or are we fighting for limited resources, which is very different, and it becomes cutthroat internally, right? My stuff should be priority, not your stuff, and here's all the reasons why. So collaborative versus competitive, but yeah, is feedback two ways? Like, are the people above me as open to feedback as I expect them to give me? Right? That's really, really important. And to your point, how do they do that? Is it a public shaming? Or is it like private growth development? Like, hey, this is an opportunity for you. And then how are you going to support that growth as an organization? So like I said, that was one of the barriers for me. I raised my hand and said, I want to grow. I want to be exposed to the biggest clients. I want the multi-million-dollar budgets. I want all the things. And they said, sure, sure, sure. And it never happened. Okay, well, I put a cloth on it. Right? Bye. So I think it's, does it support you? And the other thing is, it's like this internal gut check. You know when you're hiding part of yourself. You know when you're not showing up authentically. You know when you feel like you're of a split brain, right? I have my work persona and I have my real life persona, my friend persona, my social persona, whatever it is, right? Those two people should not be so unique that they're almost like, I don't recognize you in one space or the other. You should be showing up whole and authentic. And if there's any kind of disconnect, that's that vibe. Trust it. Like, something's off.
I keep going back to it. Is it a cult or a culture?
Yeah, love that.
Because you want to make sure that they mean what they say in terms of values and culture.
Yep.
You want to make sure that it's
not just a plaque on the wall.
right. But at the same time, is everybody just drinking the Kool-Aid and they don't tolerate challenge and that friction that's so important for companies to grow in a healthy way. Adam Grant's one of my favorite just organizational psychologists, and he talks a lot about this and how you can kind of see what's up there and some questions to ask. So just kind of inspecting that, but I agree with the feedback piece for sure, and that candidness. And I don't know if I don't know if it's being a female or what, but just this hesitancy to give me direct feedback. I'm a very direct communicator, and seems to be, and I don't know, it's also a Southern thing of, not being kind of indirect and going around. Yeah.
My heart bleeds peanut butter.
Right. And so I think it's our responsibility too to make sure that we articulate this is the kind of feedback that I want to receive, and just showing that you're open to that, asking for it.
I mean, I think when I was, going through interviews and stuff, those are questions that pop for me. Like, hey, what does feedback look like in this organization? And every person that I thought might either interact with me that I was interviewing with, or be above me in some way, like, what is your management style? Like, I need to know if you're a micromanager, because I have a valid sense of autonomy, and having someone over me all the time is very stressful for me. So again, it goes back to knowing what you want, but being able to articulate it and ask about it and ask for it is very, very important. Like, capital B boundaries.
Mm-hmm. It's critical.
So I got to be a manager way before I should have been a manager in my 20s.
Makes sense.
At a startup, and so I had the opportunity to manage, women as well as men, and I think because it was a startup, it was a lot easier for me to be authentic as well as a manager, and I hadn't learned any better, so I could just, react the same way I would to anyone. But I think if I was at a larger company, or if I had had some training, I probably would have been more sensitive to everybody. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that directness would have been possibly muted or lost. Mm-hmm. So I think, it was easier to do at a startup, to be honest, but I also, to your point, there are no controls. So it's really up to the people who run it. If they're, a bunch of assholes, you're not going to have a good time.
But did you decide you wanted to be a leader? Did you want to manage people? Or were they just like, here, you've been here a while, pick the lead, bud?
I wanted to manage the technology. And I think, leading engineers was part of that. And so, I enjoy managing people most of the time. So.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I think we have to know that about ourselves, right? Where do we want to, as we think about 3 years, 5 years, and I think about my own career path, is managing people a part of that path? Because that is technically how these evolve. Or, I know organizations where you just keep adding, going up in a number behind you're an engineer 4, now you're an engineer 5, now you're an engineer 6, like you're a legacy, we get it. And you're never gonna manage people, right? We just keep, like, that's your promotion.
Yeah, I think companies could definitely do a better job of making that a first-class citizen
Yes.
because not everybody wants to manage and not everyone
Yeah.
should. And
I
they're
agree.
excellent engineers and
Totally,
marketers.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But
I think, oh, sorry, I don't know why I'm interrupting.
no, you go for it. You're the boss.
Here, come on, you're in this.
I was just going to give my opinion. I think a lot of companies, you're right, are doing a much better job of setting IC paths that are clear cut with clear delineations that split leadership between management of people and management of technology.
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of the movement, right? To have functional managers and to have cross-functional teams, to where you may have people who manage your HR functions, but that may be very different than the team you work with, and especially if they have small cross-functional teams, which haven't really made it, I think, to larger enterprises from what I've seen, but maybe a few like Silicon Valley guys like Google are doing it well, but for the rest of us large company employees, it's still very much functional.
But it good. Okay, so like as we're having this talk, it dawns on me. Where do we learn how to lead? Like, where do we learn it? Right.
Books.
So that's what I'm saying. Unless we kind of take this initiative on ourselves, unless we say, "Hey, I know this is part of my path. Now, how do I set up the environment? How do I expose myself to the right education or the right theorists or the right paradigms for me to be able to lead people?" Like, it doesn't happen naturally. And I want us to consider the fact that, yes, when people say, look, I don't want to be a manager, I don't want to lead, we still need tracks for them where they can evolve and their expertise can grow. Where other people are saying, no, I know I'm also very skilled at a thing, but managing people and leading people feels good too. Like, I think I would be strong there.
I'm going to pull us back to the size of the company question.
Yeah.
Does having a larger company where there's more of a hierarchy give you more exposure to management styles, or standardizations of management?
I mean, there's more variability in a large organization, right?
There's
Like,
more bull.
Yeah, okay, so there's, yeah, I mean, but I guess what we're, ideal state we're hoping for is like, hey, well, then we need to start training our trainers and training our leaders and training our to be intentional about these things. That empathy is a skill you have to develop. Sensitivity training might be a thing.
And training, that's the piece that I would point out, because at a larger organization, hopefully they train their leaders. I mean, that should be what's going on. They provide that leadership training so that there is some intentionality, whereas sometimes at a startup or a smaller company, there may not be that training.
Yeah.
And so, but that can also happen at a larger organization, I'm sure.
But
I just hope we're moving away from the model of, you've been here the longest,
Yeah.
you're the leader.
I think with small companies you can have mentorship, which is more common than with larger companies. So whereas you may have formal training programs in large companies, I think smaller companies have more mentors.
That's fair. I mean, you're obviously going to get more face time, right? Like, you're going to have more personal interactions rather than more business and formal interactions in large organizations where it's like, okay, well, find time on the calendar and I'll mentor you. Okay? Okay, thanks. Yeah.
This is something I wanted you to go in on a little further, because you talked a lot about culture of personal growth.
Yeah.
But when it comes to training, this is the culture of public growth.
Yeah.
And how that differs, like you were saying, in a smaller sort of company, you tend to have the ability to come over here and watch someone, or look over their shoulder, or even have them do personal exercises where it's more. And just your experience in that kind of either training or, I think at one of our last roundtables, we had a company that came and said they would take a day off of the week or sometimes every month and just go through examples or read a book and everyone kind of follow through some
Yeah.
things and highlight it. But you can't always necessarily do that if you're under the clock and for a small company or something. So if you would just expand on that.
I haven't had had a situation that I've run into where I didn't raise my hand and say, I think I need exposure to something, and people weren't amenable. I know I can do that now at Shift, and I've top down, it's been like, hey, have you shadowed over here for a day? And hey, have you already done this for a day? And I'm like, no, that's a lot. I haven't even gotten to it yet. Like, I got a lot going on. But even in a small startup, when you're trying to be flexible and agile, and you know you're trying to be all things to all people, the startup community here is there's so much good camaraderie here, and everyone is so willing to collaborate and say, hey, I've got skills, do you want to see it? Is there something you need to know? And someone who works a ton with the humans who are impacted by all these products, services, and experiences, if I needed access to a target group that I couldn't get to, I would lean on other people for that. Right? I mean, I think your desire to have training, have mentorship really stems from someone having the voice and raising their hand first and saying, this is what I need. How do we then accommodate it? I've gone through free training here on scholarship to get my Scrum Master and my Product Owner license. I mean, there's opportunities for us to constantly evolve and upskill, particularly in Birmingham.
But that's not company related, right? That's community related. So that would be a plus of our community. But from a company level, right, if you're in a large company, there are trainings that are available, right, for your teams, whereas for a small company, it would have to be ad hoc or, right, personal driven.
Yeah, or community.
Well, if you work for a large company that's publicly traded and focused on sales, you are required to do training and get certifications, and they're going to crack the whip. You're going to have to all do this training by this day. You're all going to have to get this certification by this day. So if you want to be forced to train, go work for a publicly traded company that's focused on selling the product. They'll just think you do it.
Yeah, and then flip side of that, I mean, it kind of depends on your personality. But this was sort of a danger zone for me because in that small startup environment, I saw so many gaps and I jumped on all of them. And so I was constantly training and everything. And that's overwhelming. I learned a lot, I think. I did.
Also learn what burnout is.
Yes, that's a quick way to burn out. And it's also, you just have to know yourself and be careful. And so kind of even if you're at a small company that doesn't have those formalized training things, talking together about how can we all improve and making sure that's part of your values as a team, to make sure that everybody's growing and figuring out a way to do that. Which also brings me to something that I'm really honing in on now, which is like, what is the scope of my role, and making sure you ask those questions, because despite the size of the company, knowing that is really critical, because how many hats are you expected to wear, and what does that role look like, and how do they expect you to learn that role? Is it self-study? Do they expect you to go work on side projects all the time so that you can learn and grow? Or is there more of a effort made to allow you to use company time, and is there some initiatives in place for that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's asking about it as well. Even in the startup roles that I was in, when I presented an opportunity for an executive leadership program, for training on some psychology and behavioral stuff that I really wanted to deep dive on, it was saying, hey, this benefits our business too. Let's allocate budget for this. Even though I'm the only one who's going to receive the training, this advances the goals of our business. So did we have a training budget set out when we started? No, but we damn sure found the money once the business case was made.
That's good.
But to your point, now I'm making business cases, I'm strategizing, I'm business development, I'm doing the work, I'm working on the business, I'm brand strategist.
On that one, because we touched on burnout, and we're also on culture, I think, for the company. Could we go into what culture does about, or company culture does about burnout, or maybe just the beginning of burnout when you start to get weary? Because that's an important part of the company. And all of a sudden, I see someone that say, "Oh, this is you need to take a break."
This has been a crazy past year, right? How we're coping mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically to the changes we've had to go through, to how we've had to adapt and or evolve. personally is huge. So I think it's been a huge misstep if organizations have not genuinely asked the question around wellness and mental health legitimately. Literally, how are you doing? Like, not your work, how are you doing? And I think adept managers and leaders have if they're doing their jobs well, they have a really good a temperature check on what's going on with their people, right? So if I think burnout's coming at all, ever, I want to be able to intervene for people on my team way before they get to that state.
So burnout is personal, right? So I think your direct manager, your people around you, you have to have someone who can tell you, hey, so who you believe on a more global level. So Sousa called, an HR person from Sousa called me after the Texas, freeze earlier this year when we lost power.
Yeah.
It was random and surprising, and I was like, all right, that's kind of cool, like just to see how I was doing. So, I think there's two levels there, right? Your immediate, your plus one, right? Your boss, and you having that relationship where you can discuss things like that and your teammates. And then the second level is, right, from a company standpoint, do they, one, care enough to ask, and care enough to know? And I think maybe with larger companies that gets the well culture, like larger companies that's kind of built in. Because also for retention purposes as well, like you want to take care of your people, because right now there are not a lot of people to take all the openings.
I think that's a really cool distinction too, right? So that actually brings up two things for me. What am I willing to do as a leader of a team, and what does the company allow me to do, right? What are the parameters within which I have to stay in my lane according to HR and legal, whatever these things are. But as a people leader, one of the first things I was very vulnerable about, but very adamant about, was saying, look, if you need to take a mental health day, there are no questions asked. Take it. Just communicate to me, right? Let me know that there's something going on, but like, I want to be able to support you no matter what happens. If you cannot show up present for that day, for that work, take the day. It's that important to me, because what we do and all the meetings we're going to sit in and the decisions we're going to make and the research we're going to review and I need you there. I need your capacity, your brain, all the things. That's why we're on the team together. So my team is here. Like, that was one of the first things. I was like, hey, if you need mental health days, take them. This matters to me. It matters to me that much that you're able to show up present. Yeah.
No, I am.
I was just saying, I was like, I'm going to be the first one to be vulnerable with you. If I'm having a bad day, I'm going to let you know, right? And I expect you to do the same. I want that. So whatever I can do to create a psychologically safe place for you to share that with me. You don't have to tell me what's going on, but tell me, like, hey, it's that day. I need that day. And good, I'll clear your schedule. I'll sit in your meetings, because it matters.
I'm going to jump in on this, even though I'm not technically on the panel, because I feel strongly about
Yeah.
it. One of the things that I just left a role where I was a tech lead, and one of the things I felt very strongly about on my team was that we made sure there was enough sharing of knowledge, so that, because I had a lot of really strong, driven people on my team who deeply cared about the team and didn't want to let the team down, and sometimes that prevents you from taking the mental health day when you should.
Yep.
But when you have shared your knowledge and you respect everybody else's strengths and expertises, while having enough shared knowledge that somebody can pick up the slack.
Love that.
As a leader, making sure that there is enough overlap and there is enough sharing, so that when the day comes that, hey, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning, I'm grouchy.
Yeah, like I'm not.
I'm
okay.
going to the park.
Yeah.
Is actually an acceptable thing you can do. And that's, you have to be intentional about that as a leader.
I think from a business owner standpoint too, you just want that from a, not day you have a bad day, but
Bus
you get
factor.
hit, the bus factor, absolutely. If you get hit by a bus, someone needs to be able to replace you for business continuity. So that learning session as well is important for, for being able to cover for your team. It's important for other reasons too. There's just no reason not to do that.
I want to make sure we open up the floor so that everybody has a chance to ask questions. And I'm going to go over and step over there. Go ahead.
I just have a question. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Let me know if you So obviously, you guys have a lot of experiences with different sizes of, 25 people or 500 people. So I'm kind of, you touched on it a little bit, but I want to hear, put a fine point on it. There's obviously growing pains as you go from a small to a medium to a large. How do you start, what are those growing pains, and then how do you identify those? Because I'm sitting here thinking, obviously, there's growing pains. But if you can identify them fast enough, and you can look for, the trademark signs, you can start to identify it, know thyself, know, is this a change that I'm not going to be okay with, and kind of, get ahead of it? I'm just curious, how do you start to identify some of those growing pains as the company starts to go from small, medium, large? I feel like that's a very loaded question, but.
No,
That's a good one.
You want to take it?
Yeah, sure.
Go, start.
I think when they start trying to be something that they're not yet, and you start seeing a lot of changes around management, personnel, process, you're going through a turbulent phase of growth. It's probably, or you're the one initiating it because you understand that it needs to be changed. So, how you handle that, I think, is dependent on how you think it's going, right? If it looks like they jumped the shark, then maybe, you should be looking for an exit or a way to, to help if you can, and if you can't, or if you want to, if it's something that you're not comfortable with. But I think management, even though it usually does a really, really bad job, sometimes they will show you their hand, in what they're saying, what they want, and just take that at face value. I think whether how successful they are in achieving it is a completely different story. But if the story is something you believe in, if the path is somewhere you want to go, and you understand it, right, then stay. But if it's not being articulated to you, if it's not where you want to go, then you just have to watch out for that.
I'd say transparency is so key, because if you hear a bunch of grumbling and it's not being addressed, that's a big sign that there's some big growing pains going on, and you certainly want to make sure that that's communicated and where they're going, and if it's not, asking, and then that's a good way to make a decision if they're not willing to talk about that. And then this may sound just obvious, but where I am now, it's super fast growing. So the number of hires starts ticking up, and you can tell, do we have the systems in place to support this, to scale like this? Otherwise, it's going to be a huge problem. So that's an obvious one, but looking at the documentation, looking at the systems in place for onboarding and bringing people up to speed, that's huge.
I think those are really, really good ones. I like, once you realize people don't necessarily even know the vision of the business anymore, that you've grown really fast, right? We're not even able to trickle it down yet, but here we are, and we're all moving, and we're dragging people as we go. I'd say that's definitely a symptom. How communication is expertise siloed, or do I have visibility into other areas of the business, right? Do I know what our engineering group is working on? Do I know what our customer service people are working on? Do I know what their priorities are? Because how do they impact my role? Are there contingencies? Are there things that I'm not missing? Or am I so heads down on a thing I don't even have time to see it anymore? Those are two big ones for me. Like I said, being sunk into the vision, even knowing what the vision is for the business and where it's going, is so, so important when we talk about culture, right? Because people showing up and reflecting your culture is an expression of their buy-in to your vision, right? We have, in organizations who kind of skip that step to make sure people are really on board, it's because they're growing, and it's we need people, we don't have time for this, right? There's a sense of, it's you can smell the desperation a little bit, right? We just need bodies, people.
That's just me, sorry.
Yeah, it's just kidding. It's just but yeah, I think those are two that I would look for. And honestly, I'm always big on how psychologically safe are you, and how psychologically safe is the communication and our ability to provide feedback And when you are in these cross-functional teams, which some organizations are really afraid of and some are embracing them. Some are, some, to your point, like we need that tension and friction. My expertise should not be an affront to your expertise. Let's leverage it, right? It's not a competition. It goes back to, is it a competition or is it a collaboration, right? So I think that's really, really important is like, do I actually have visibility into these other areas? And could I genuinely even talk about what they do in a general sense? Or am I so removed? Is my specialty so removed that like they don't even know what I do either?
I just thought of another one that's really big, and there's different philosophies about this. I think this is kind of a polarizing thing, but
Okay, I'm here for it.
is
Okay, we like those.
so, especially in tech, you got a product typically you're trying to sell. Is sales moving faster than the product, and is that tolerated? And is this a customer-centric or an employee-centric or just like a person-centric company? And I got my opinions on that. Actually, I work at a company that says, hey, we are customer-focused, we're customer-centric. I don't know if I agree with that, but they also really take care of their people internally. And so that's why I was like, okay, I'm okay with this, and we'll see. But that's a big growing pain sign to me. Are we selling vaporware? Are we moving faster than we can sustain? And do we care that our people, our internal people, are suffering and can't keep up? And I worry so much, especially in tech, about those customer service people, those people that are on the front lines that have to hear it, because I'm so insulated from that. But I worry about that and I care about that because that will tank a company really fast. You damage that reputation pretty fast with your.
So do you think turnover then is a good indicator
Yes.
of like you've grown too fast and now people are not sunk into your vision and they're like, I'm out?
And it's true for any size company, because I've seen this at large companies and small companies, and it sounds like you've seen it at medium-sized companies about how, that disconnect between sales and engineering, between what you're doing, what you're selling, and what you're doing. That's something to watch out for. And the customer service issue can impact small companies, medium companies, large companies. My first tech startup was for a gentleman who was the first VP of customer service for Compaq in the late 80s. So we all answered the phone. So all my developers answered the phone. And we took the ownership approach of where if you answer the phone, you have to chase that problem down, and you're responsible for it until it was resolved or the resolution, negative or positive. And so I think that gave all our engineers a really good look at what was going on. Now, on days where we accidentally charge people for credit cards during our early ticketing system days, where we overcharged 100 people, those were not great days to be an engineer or anybody at the company, because our CEO, me, our accountant, our secretary, our customer service people, and our engineers were all on the phone, calling. But I think that prioritization, I think that showed that we at least were able to and were willing to clean up real large messes. And that company is still doing great today. And I think maybe they don't do that quite as much anymore, but they still have a very good handle on their customer service. And maybe if they did that, it wouldn't be so good.
I was gonna say, is there in this eternal conflict? Is that what we're talking about between sales and engineering? Business dev is going to they're the yes men of the organization. They're going to be like, we can do that. Yes, we got that. Yes. And you're like, oh shit, can we do that? As an actual product person, you're like, is that what we do here?
Well, what's the line, right? If you're asking that question, maybe that's okay. But if you're like, oh no, we can't do that for sure, then maybe that's too far. But
maybe I guess what I'm saying is that visibility and communication between these two organizations. Yes, BizDev, we want you to hustle. We want you to go after it. We know you don't sleep at night unless you're closing deals. Cool. But we also don't want to drown over here. And we also our pride and integrity hinges on us delivering a great product, which you might have handicapped us.
And,
I think you got that salespeople.
but I was
But that's
about
what
to
I'm saying,
say,
like-
salespeople don't want to sell that
A
either.
really good salesperson wants to know what the company sucks at, so we can never sell it to the customer. Only sell them the good things.
Do they?
No, I said good.
Okay,
salespeople.
okay.
People understand you can't do smash and grab. You're going to be a salesperson for 20, 30 years. You figure out what the company does bad. Most of your job is to figure out what you do bad and keeping the customer away from it so they'll only buy the stuff that's good.
Good.
There's nothing worse than a customer yelling and screaming at you for the rest of the
So this is me maybe being an advocate for like really good sales training.
Yes.
Back to training.
Yeah. and it goes back to, so we're talking about size of company. It's a lot easier to be in alignment at a
Yes.
smaller company.
Yeah, well, when you're a 6,000 to 300,000 person company, you can't do that. The product does what it does. And
Yes.
that's it. There's no telling the customer does that because it doesn't do that and it's not going to do that.
Well,
so
so
weird.
that's
Even though you're-
GE is going to have to be extremely
Yeah.
deal, and then it'll
I
do
love
it.
it.
You can't go to
If it's
Regions
yeah.
Bank. They're not going to do it for Regions Bank. They're going to tell Regions Bank that it just doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Because they're not-
That's fair. That's fair. I love this discussion.
I can't approach this the way you guys do because you have a different way of thinking than I do. I mean, it's just I believe in whatever. But I've known good football teams, basketball teams. They have the best players.
Yeah.
You could look at them and say, "This is the best team," and they were terrible. And one reason is because they had bad chemistry. They couldn't
Mhm.
communicate with each other. I know this one coach. He inherited this football team. They had great players. They had a terrible record. So he just come up with these new plans. He said, every Thursday, we have a room day. We all get down here, all those seniors, sophomores, all the players. And he said, we have a room day. If you come up with me and you say, you don't like the way I look, you don't like the way he plans, whatever. And they talk about it. And then by Friday morning, it's all right. Okay, so that's a small way of looking at communication. When you've got a small place or a big place, and your team of salesmen can't communicate with the people doing engineering, you see what I'm saying?
it's a process
There's
issue.
something wrong there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the way you're talking about it is very nice as far as putting this down in discussion. How do you turn that into real work? How do you really make it so that people can understand each other and know what's going on? They had the same problem with us building American cars. The Japanese come along and they just opened the place up because they had a different way of looking at things, and America stayed here.
Well, they actually took Ted Deming, who was the American and invented everything the Japanese took. They actually took an American's ideas that couldn't get implemented, and they used that against us in the 70s.
It's not just that.
But it wasn't Japanese thinking, it was literally American ideas.
So I think it was Japanese.
It doesn't matter. But the point is,
The CEO is
Yeah,
We have that here in Spain. Now, I don't know about your companies, but you got people who look like, okay, I'm a CEO, I can't even talk to you guys. In the Japanese, I've seen.
That sounds like
that's
an
just
ego thing.
bad leadership.
No,
Yeah.
it's the way that you want to communicate. It's the way you communicate with all your people. So the people on the front line know what's going on everywhere. They all know. They're all in the same thing. They're all pushing the same boat.
And all of the leadership research preaches that. Like, you got to talk to your people, every single person involved. I keep thinking about, anybody watch Ted Lasso? Like, such a great, it's all about leadership and teams and how to think about that. Because if you don't talk to the people on the front lines, you're going to have no idea. Because especially at a larger organization, those executives that live in a totally different space, and they kind of have to. But so, I mean, practically speaking, if you're at a company that does have poor communication, there's frameworks to really help with that. I'm a big believer in getting good frameworks and not trying to just learn everything
Yeah,
the
I
hard
don't think
way.
we have to reinvent the wheel if things
Right.
are efficacious in industry.
Yeah, there's
So it works the same way for football teams as it does for businesses, right? You have a process. It's like those Thursday meetings. That is a process for fixing the communication issue. So in business, we have this, like in tech, there's the same thing. You have to have a process, and the companies that fail, the companies that have have this disconnect between sales, they're the ones who don't do that. So I mean, those are just bad companies that.
What he did on Thursdays was not just a way of fixing communication, it was communication. It was part of it.
just bringing in.
Look, you will have 50 people, 500 people, you will have somebody there who's a narcissist.
Yeah.
And he is going to.
It's always.
How do you deal with something like that? So, the company has to be able to deal with that in some way, a framework, a you're talking about, it has to be able to be done. It's nice to talk about, but how do you actually make it work? How do you deal with somebody like that?
You have people who are not afraid to confront that one narcissist. If I'm being honest, there is nothing that will kill a team more than a toxic person on that team.
You have to fire them.
Yes. You have to figure out how to eliminate that issue or isolate that issue, because that is literally the top demotivating factor on a team is watching someone else not pull their weight and management not doing anything about it.
Yeah, and again, I'm going back to some of these other companies.
Y'all already know. I don't sit by.
They have certain ways of dealing with that. I like doing amateur research. When I was young, I was a reporter. I just used to, my nickname when I was young was Sherlock Holmes. I love studying things. You know, I just love it. Like the car company in Vance, they have certain institutional ways of dealing with things that would distract people from what they're doing. For example, you can't have a pool. They're on a football team. You know, you put the little name, you put the squares down, they catch you doing it, they fire you right there. It's not allowed. So if you see somebody who's doing something that's kind of narcissistic or whatever, you have to go to them like that and say, hey, well, we can't let that happen because you're messing up the whole paradigm of what's going on. It's discussing how this thing is going to work. You know, what we're trying to do, we're trying to build cars there or whatever. Everybody has that way of dealing with something, but it has to be done in a way that everybody can enjoy it, everybody can be part of it, that they can put their input in it. So how do you go back from what you're doing, talking about there, to actually put the rubber in the road?
Of getting company buy-in or employee buy-in into like what you're doing.
Yes. And like little things, like I knew this one company that said if you're a woman and you get pregnant, you have to take time off your medical leave because you're sick. Now I don't think a woman who's pregnant is sick. I think she's pregnant. It's part of the process. So they should not make a woman take sick time off. And that's just something that helps the overall process of communication. The woman says, no, I don't think that's right. You know, you should be able to give maternity leave or whatever. What it's doing is it's allowing the company to have a well-known structure of communication. And that goes all the way back from the way you engineer a product to the way it sells.
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand the connection between what you just mentioned, which is discrimination, and a good company culture. Like some things as an employee you just shouldn't tolerate, right? If a company, and if you do, that's your choice, but that
It's
like
also a legal issue.
that's well now it is, yeah, and it's a symptom of
Pregnant is definitely illegal.
Yeah.
In all 50 states.
Although, if you're a teacher, that's what you have to do. You have to take your sick leave if you're pregnant.
Right, but they can't force you to take the sick leave.
Right.
That forcing you to go home and not work and use your sick leave is illegal.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure yet, like how. So what? That's not really about implementing, right? So that is just a bad organization that does that, and you can talk to them about it, but in the end, if they don't want to change, you can sue them, right? So from outside or inside the organization, you have legal options to correct it. Now it's usually never good. Like I've never seen someone who sued an organization be a continual employee of it. That's not effective. But maybe leaving is the best you can do for that kind of organization.
Well, see, this is actually the nuance of what I'm trying to reach. I'm not trying to talk about sexism or whatever. I'm saying that you shouldn't have to have people quit to understand this problem. You should know from it.
I firmly agree, and I think it's getting closer to what the issue is, right? So if there is, what it sounds like is there's a disconnect between the top and the bottom, and there needs to be a bridge. And I guess I think you're looking for specific tactics, but that is starting cohorts internally, starting panels, doing internal surveys, like making sure that you're tapping into what the voice of your employees actually is and making sure it's valid and representative of the people. And then who gives a shit how many questions you ask if you're not going to do anything with it? If you don't have the infrastructure to do anything about it, it doesn't matter how many surveys HR sends out. Right? You actually have to have people at the top who believe in a strong culture that is collaborative and inclusive. That's what you're talking about. We can talk about DE&I all day, but the I is the most important. Do women feel included? Do minorities feel included? Are they in the rooms where decisions are being made? Like, that is a huge deal.
So-
I'm going to jump in because I want to make sure we get to Steve's questions.
Come on,
Hey,
Steve.
Steve.
Steve's got some questions about family atmosphere,
That always
how many company cultures value psychological safety consciously? And I'm going to jump in and try to pull us back onto theme. Size of company, does that affect it? But also, core of this question, because I don't want to take away from the core of this question. I'll say it once more. How many company cultures value psychological safety consciously?
Oof.
I don't know if it's something that actually shows up in culture as much as it shows up on your teams and how your leaders interact with their teams, right? Because if you are in fact an effective leader, psychological safety is absolutely a priority for you. Making sure that your team feels like they can talk to you and you can also talk to them. Does that show up on a culture statement? Like, look, you work in a psychologically safe environment. No.
But it probably
shows
should.
up in the behavior. It shows up in what you do. It shows up in how you interact.
But it probably should show up in a value somewhere. Like, hey, we care about, everyone feeling safe and expressing themselves. And so maybe if it doesn't show up in a value, then that's something to ask about, right? So it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because there are plenty of company cultures that are more real than, than what the values that are written down. Or maybe not cultures. There are plenty of unspoken company values that exist at, especially a lot of the smaller companies, I would say, because I think bigger companies do a better job of articulating their values, whereas small companies, it's really it's up to the boss, and the boss is king.
Yeah, and do those values exist at scale? It could happen. I have a great manager who cares about my psychological safety. What happens if he goes somewhere else? Or, am I going to get the same experience if it's not written down in those values? If it's not coming, as a message throughout, that makes a big difference, because you don't want that inconsistency depending on who your team lead is.
I think you will have inconsistency though, right? And I think that's a factor of the leader. Are they a manager or are they a leader? There's a difference.
Yeah, and even if companies would have the values written out, it's still up to there's that saying that people leave their manager, they don't leave their company.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly right. And I think that's one of the things we have to consider, right? So if we all individually, if we know we are a team lead, we have people that report to us, we have people that we're interacting with, and we are responsible for their professional growth and their performance. It matters to me that they can communicate with me, right? That's an important thing, but it is on me. I don't know what other team leads are doing, but in so much as it is up to me, this is a priority. My team feeling psychologically safe is a damn priority, and I will do whatever I need to make sure that space is safe.
And that's awesome, and I'm and I want to clone, you.
I get
but
it.
That's the hard part is it's got to be systematic in a way.
Completely agree.
Otherwise, you don't have that. Then it's best for the company if it is, and doesn't matter the size. Creating that, I would think that at a larger organization, it would be, there are systems already in place to do that, to train leaders and managers and bring things to their attention they may not otherwise think about. Because I think that's a big piece too, that this is sort of a new thing to talk about in the workplace. And so you might have some
Which
older,
is interesting, right?
It is, but you might have some older managers, leaders that this has never occurred to them. This was not part of their experience. They just don't think about it. And so they need some education around that. And that's probably, I would think, happen more at larger organizations. I don't know, but
No, I totally agree, and I think why I made the point was to say even when other teams interact with my team, I want to be an example of what it could be for them. And if they're like, hey, I see what you guys are doing there, you're performing better, you're communicating better, your productivity is off the charts, you're actually having fun, you guys get along, you're getting through conflict faster than most teams. Okay, great, well here's how we did that. Okay, thanks.
So psychological safety, though, is a different thing for different groups, right? So for like a football team, it may be different than it is for a tech company. Google does a great job of systemizing, or at least according to Radical Candor, Google does a great job of systemizing this kind of learning. But other companies do not. But the key, I think, is understanding what psychological safety means for where you are, right? What is expected, what is tolerated. And when those things aren't clear is when you get a difference between expectations and what happens, and you lose that. Like if you're used to getting called, an idiot when you do idiotic things, but there's more than that, right? There's an expectation of that kind of candor. Maybe not directly. That's because it's a personal attack, but what you did was idiotic would be a better way, a direct, but not personalized way of saying that. But if that's expected, if you're expected to speak that way, and that communication is like two-way, right? It goes across leadership structures as opposed to one way. But so that could still be psychological safety in that environment. But when you deviate from that, and when companies, especially smaller companies, have inconsistent approaches to handling that, I think you have much more variance, and you can't really the fish stinks from the head, so the top can control that to a point by setting boundaries. But
I just love your metaphors.
no, thank you.
Well, and I actually, when you were saying that, it made me think well, if I have to ask these questions, am I in a psychologically safe environment, right? But so it got me thinking, what is implicit safety and what needs to be explicit, to your point, explicit safety, that we have to have these discussions. And one of my things is you just go first. If you're like, hey, I was always like, hey, I'm going to be the first to tell you, like, hey, I want you to give me feedback as much as you would expect it from me. I want you. So I've always been that, hey, let me just start the discussion now and tell you where, to your point, like, here's what I expect. Here's what I think this could go. But you know what? I'm open-minded, and this is an iterative process. If this doesn't work for us, we'll figure out another way, right? So I think to your point, it's not only defining it, but then what is implicit versus explicit in the behaviors and how it shows up. But no, we know all cultures are not doing this well.
Anything else from Steve?
Steve. Can we talk about the family one? I have thoughts.
The family atmosphere culture. I've got a series of potential topics going forward, and definitely one of them is company cultures and culture values.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, I can't wait to do that one.
I mean, if you really want to talk,
No, just go. Whatever you think.
I don't have a next question. If we don't have any more questions from here or from the audience, then I'm okay.
What, is that more question?
There's a question from Steve, but it's calling me out specifically.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Katie.
Digits.
That's a future topic conversation. Cool. Thanks, Steve. I'll put that one on the list. So I'm just gonna look for an informal number of hands. We're not deciding anything, but just so that I've got a temperature read on what people are interested in. Packets are great.
I feel like I want to go together in psychological safety now.
So, number one, mentorship and sponsorship.
Okay.
Anybody have interests in mentorship and sponsorship?
Yeah, I'm putting on an event if anyone would like to sponsor DevOps Days 2022.
Okay, we're not talking about that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, different kinds of sponsors.
Yeah.
Ship would be
Okay.
great.
They would. Ship would be a great sponsor.
So one of the ones that's come up with a couple of people is a technology death match. What is the best new hot technology?
Oh, gosh.
Yes, definitely. Oh, that's gonna be awesome. We're gonna get it with food. Yeah, we need some kind of Nerf guns or some kind of weapons.
I had an old coworker who used to soup up his Nerf guns. He would pull apart the.
See, that's not even fair.
Base provided Nerf guns.
He shot something from it was like this distance across the room. He shot back and it hit me in the face, and I had a huge black eye that I had to
Okay, no nerve guns. All right. Psychological safety.
No, maybe just like literally tech deathmatch.
Yes.
Conversations about dying technologies. What technologies are dying and what does it mean?
Death Watch. Yes.
That's
Hands
interesting.
For interest?
Am I the only one that wants to do that?
It depends
Like,
on.
let it die. Murder capitals is 90.
Death Watch is always
As long
fun.
as all
we
statements
don't-
are supported by facts.
I think Deathmatch and Deathwatch could be the same.
Yes.
Yeah,
Matching
it could
Death
be.
Watch?
Yeah.
Check that.
What about remote, hybrid, on-premises working? Like different working environments?
I
as a
mean,
topic?
I don't, unless you own your own business, I don't know how much we can influence that.
Not
also
necessarily
like-
about influencing, but if you are, what's working, much like
Oh,
what
okay,
size
okay.
of company works for
That's
you,
fair.
what kind of, some people don't work great in a remote job, and they just know that about themselves, and some
Yeah.
people do so much better in one. Figuring that one out. Is there any interest in that one? Now that we're coming out of COVID and we're going
Are we
back?
coming out of COVID?
Now-
Maybe
now-
let's do a panel on are we coming out of COVID?
Company cultures and values seems to be hitting
Yeah.
a lot of people. Yeah. What about IC versus management? We touched on that a little bit
What?
today.
I'm sorry, what's that?
IC versus management.
What does I see?
Yeah.
Individual contributor.
Oh.
Sorry, individual contributor as in.
Fancy industry words.
So is that kind of more like a conversation about career growth and
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah,
different?
career growth and
What's-
yeah, kind of like this the staff engineer.
I feel like that's one-sided.
Like you're either-
Did I just start? Did I just start something?
But no, I mean, it could be an interesting conversation about making sure that you're intentional about which way you want to go and why, and different was it Radical Candor that talked about rock stars and superstars
Yep,
and how that
totally.
changes over the course of people's careers
The
as well?
manager's path also does a very good job of talking through this one. I think. I'm a book person.
Yeah.
So.
I'm an audiobook person.
Yeah.
Steve wants to know if anybody's interested in talking more about Agile, Scrum, and Operations Management.
He's too advanced for me. I'd have a long way to go.
I think it would be an interesting topic with him, just because,
If he
Come
could,
to the next social event, we'll have that talk.
yeah.
which is on the 26th, and am I allowed to say about Amazon? No.
Yeah, AWS is gonna be there.
Yeah, AWS is gonna be there. Yay!
We're still on.
Where's it at?
26th and back for
you
you.
outside.
Cool.
Yep. So we'll do it outside for the.
For now, I guess we're still doing it.
Yeah. Oh, they may cancel,
This
right?
stuff keeps getting canceled.
I know.
Other topics from
Yeah,
Anybody?
interested in other topics, you can reach out to me,
Or say it now.
or say in
Yeah.
Slack or whatever, speak it.
Topics.
future.
We'll come up with one.
We have plenty. We can get us through the rest of 2021 on this.
Nice. All right. So for next one, we're gonna do it ITAC, right? Is that?
Yes, next one will be at ITAC. I don't have the dates, I need to confirm with Alex.
But they have easier entry as well. So during the day, this place is great because they have people up front and they know that we're here, and so this is an awesome place to do like lunch and learns. But at night, it's more difficult because there's not someone up front all the time. But okay, so are we cutting the feed? Are we done?
Are we done?
Hey!
What's up?
I know everybody here is educated and practical and.
High school dropout right
I have a
here.
feeling that at a party, we'd all have a hell of a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
I think there's room here for everybody. There was no pretense in me saying that. It was just
I'm also an
unqualified.
Ivy League dropout. I spent 6 years at Jeff State.
You too.
Like, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is exciting. We actually had 5 people watching at the live,
Oh,
which
right.
is
What?
Yeah, good.
so. Hey, thanks y'all. Appreciate